Hello, hello, hello. We are on and rolling. I like to say every prediction I've ever heard Kevin Jodrey make, I've actually seen come true so far in many parts of my life. So this is going to be good.
Let's see. You got good sound? All right. Hi, I'm Kevin Jodrey. Thanks for the invite. And so I got brought in today to talk about like strategies of survival, because the small farm is ill-equipped to really compete in the modern market. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And because I have a farm, a small farm, in addition to other holdings, I have a different perspective to it because I'm innately connected to it. It's mine. So what I discovered, struggling with this conundrum was I put it down. I put the problem down. And what I did is I allowed myself to go work in some other directions so that I would be able to explore other avenues that would potentially give me abilities to make a better headway as we went forward. And so the root of this conversation is going to be really about some disruptive technologies that I'm involved with that I think you need to be aware of so that you can kind of understand how these things will intersect you in the future, and then how we would use them as smaller operators and the benefits of them, okay? So, has anybody been playing with ChatGPT? Okay, so you're playing with the AI device. And it's an incredible device. Right now, ChatGPT, if you were to be a ChatGPT in human form, you'd be worth $187,000 a year at Google. So that little program is a $187,000 a year job because it can replace someone who's making almost $200,000 for a worker. And it's in its infancy, really. So we take this AI device, which is a data miner and a comparative tool. It takes a look at things and compares and predicts. And so AI has been used in agriculture for a long time. And we use it in ag and commoditized crops such as corn, wheat, rice, coffee. And what it does for us in these applications is it takes maybe 6 years off a 10-year cycle. So if we're breeding commoditized corn, it's a 10-year process to get a corn line out. And it's an unbelievable amount of work to really narrow down what parental stock are we going to use to develop our lines. And so when we work as a human, we have an ability to ask maybe 1,000 questions. When we use AI, machine learning, we have the ability to ask 900 million questions. And what that means is that when you're working with plant breeding and you're using modern genomics, you're looking at what genes control what functions. But what you have is this really complex interrelationship on a bigger picture of how they all work synergistically. So we want to believe it's a simple light switch, and in some cases it is, but in a bigger picture, a more complex picture, it's this relationship of how all these work. And so what you do with the machine learning is you run a crop and you assay the data and you start to look at the plants that have probability from your observations, and the computer starts to look at the relationship between the genes that are present and the results that you've achieved. We can now take a look at a bigger population and allow the machine learning to start asking questions of patterns. What patterns do we see? And so these patterns allow us to be able to speed up the development of a process. But the thing that we need to learn, as much as why I asked about ChatGPT, is that it's not so much the question, it's the quality of the question. It's the quality of the prompt. And so if we were to use ChatGPT and ask, how do we survive as a small farmer, it would maybe give you a very simple answer. But if we were to say, as a cannabis farmer under this level canopy, under these constraints in this particular market, with these limitations and these possibilities, the answer would be far more accurate. And so I use the ChatGPT to write copy. I use it if I wanted to write a bio for a lecture. I could ask it, tell me this answer, but I prompt it. And the point of this is that you are about to see this enter your world. So cannabis has not had this happen yet. And so some of the stuff I do in the world, I'm limited on how much I can talk about just because of contractual obligations. But I know that this particular topic is incredible because what it does, it starts to allow us to ask questions about, if I was a farmer in Grass Valley and I wanted to be able to optimize the biology of the soil beneath my plant, and I had an essay of that biology, I'd be able to take it and determine what was the impact of that biology on the genome, and how do I then steer the breeding to optimize that biology. So you're able to start developing things that are highly specific, that are unique. And the ability to do this is going to be upon you in a couple years. So if it's 10 years to do a normal commoditized crop, and they have data, which we don't have with cannabis right now. We don't have the AI data. But once we start to develop the data, it's the quality of the questions we're going to ask. And what it'll do is it'll allow us to start to really refine our process of what we create, what we build, and what we do. And in that, it allows you as smaller operators, including myself, to be able to start to figure out how do we optimize our products so that what we have is things that work ideally. So when we just had the lecture of the blue mats. And so we could ask the question, what's the lowest water consumption that a plant could function with? And then run the data sets against the genome and determine which ones actually worked. And then open up populations using machine learning and find the outlier plants that we would work to breed with that allowed us to really optimize to fit the circumstances we're using. So right now it's a science that's confusing because no one really touches it. But the best way to really describe it is when you go back 25 years, I remember telling my grandparents, you're going to be banking on your phone. And they said to me, you're an idiot. No one will ever bank on their phone. And I said, okay. They're banking on their phone. And that's really where we're at right now, is that you're in this beginning of this disruptive technology world that has implications that are incredible. But for craft operators, they're also possible because as we go forward, right now it's an extremely complex process, but with the cloud and a phone, I should be able to tap into applications just like ChatGPT and be able to utilize these tools to help us steer our direction so that what we're doing is we're not just randomly hunting and looking and hoping to find, but we're actually taking a look at fantastic combinations of genes. And what the machine learning potential does is it allows us to ask questions of the computer and say, what do you see? What do you see possible? What combinations are possible? What potential outcomes are possible? And so when, like I said earlier, when you look at a potential outcome and you only have 1,000 possibilities that you can come up with, but your machine learning potential takes you up to 900 million possibilities, it starts to allow us to broaden our thoughts in what can we do, where can we go, and what really is the limit. And I think that this is the stuff that really has to be kind of brought up because it's not something you're going to touch today, but it's imperative that you see it. And so for me, I have a problem where I always look into the future because I'm afraid I'm going to get wiped out in my craft. And so since I like growing pot so much, I didn't want to ever get stifled that I had to leave because I know no one would hire me in any other field. And so it forced me to do a lot of research continuously to understand where we were going to go. And as for someone who did nursery work, I was someone who was involved in tissue culture in 2008. And so I knew the future was coming in that direction. And people said there's no need. And then all of a sudden you have hop latent. Now it's imperative. And so we get into these other issues of new pathogenic problems, new pressures, new demands. And people say, well, I can conventionally breed through the problem. I can conventionally select through the problem. But what's going to happen is you're going to get to a circumstance that's above your ability. And then you're going to get left behind because you're not able to implement the technology. So it's not so much that, you have to jump on it today because you can't. There's only so many firms on earth that have the capability to do this. It's just that that speed of development will be astronomical. And so they believe the AI world will be really the first trillionaire. And so if you're calculating the funding that's going to come into this, it's about to be mind-bendingly quick. And for us in cannabis ag, it's imperative to understand it and just become familiar with asking questions of artificial intelligence. What questions can you ask? How do you perfect your question? How do you steer the question so that you're able to use the technology as you move forward? Because really, what you have is you have this exploding world of cannabis. So even though, like for us in California, it's a death sentence almost, it'll straighten out. It'll all straighten out. It's just that each group that I talk to tells me, well, our markets are great. And I'm like, give it a minute. And you'll go through the same situation. And so there's going to be a rise, a peak, a fall, a trough, and then it comes back up and it stabilizes. And it's just really a simple business curve. But that curve of development fits any industry, any development. It seems to be holding true, just like 80-20 rules. 80-20 rules are 80% of your money comes from 20% of your people. 80% of the people in America took the vaccine, 20% didn't. 80% of the country chose not to rebel against the English, 20% did. These numbers seem to hold true mathematically no matter how we look at it. And so if you can kind of take a look and see these numbers that seem to hold true and trends that seem to hold true, then what you know is, especially with the pace of development, that the world you're in terms of genomics is about to absolutely blow open. So when we do genomic work, we're looking at chromosomes and we're identifying traits of interest, and we see what happens when we trigger that or change it. And some of those changes are resulting in plants now that have accelerated vigor. So we can go from seed 2 weeks after germination, that's a complete veg cycle. And when we compare that 2-week germinated seed to the clone that it was derived from, it dwarfs it in all forms of production. So they've identified now, and I'm involved in these, so I know it's real in real life. So when you have the ability to start identifying vigor genes, resistance genes, agronomic trait genes, then you start to have an ability to create more and create easier. But for us in the craft world, more isn't important. It really isn't. It's less but better, because the essence of craft is not more product. That's why I hate that saying because it's just so oxymoronic, but craft at scale. It can't be done. You can't build a lot and build a lot good. There's always a trade. And so when we get into this new world of this, it's a story of how do we use these new tools. And so I'm working with some new lighting. So I picked up some Foch lights to do some breeding work, and I love them. And I realized that the potential is great. But what we know too is we're going to have to do research on them so that we're able to find plants that respond the way we want them to respond in the same way they responded to the lights they were developed under, be it HPS, CMH, or sunlight. And if you're doing sunlight development, what angle of inclination are you developing them under? So all these variables start to create like these really unique, specific developmental challenges that you're going to see addressed by AI. It has the ability to do it. And so right now, it can only be done by really heavily funded groups that have this ability, and there's only so many of them on Earth. But what I believe is this change is going to happen so rapidly that if we're not aware of it, you're going to kind of get left behind in it. And the point of it is that these technological changes don't make us obsolete at all, because the goals of larger companies are always the most for the least. It's not typically for the most satisfaction to the user. And so for craft cannabis production, which is what we're really all involved in, it's really about quality of experience to the end user. The person who consumes it, are they most happy? And for me, up in Humboldt County, when we did all the appellation development, the goal was always to be able to start to figure out how do you develop plants that are unique, that allow you to have an impact on that region that can't be replicated. And when they use grape, people don't understand that the grape and the land were one. They weren't transplanted vines. They were vines that grew on that piece. They're intrinsically connected. You can't separate them. It's why the French are so adamant about Americans don't really have Appalachian potential, because what we do is we move a grape to a piece of land and then we say, it does this. But it doesn't have the relationship formed from the soil biology, the air, the whole package isn't connected. And so when you're trying to create value in cannabis long term, which is what we really need to do, is we're the pioneers of a new world of cannabis. What I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to develop the land in my region, and not just mine, but all the properties, and give people an ability to be able to have long-term land valuation. For me, growing cannabis outside wasn't so much that I wanted to grow pot, it's that I wanted to grow herb on my property so I could protect my property. How do you maintain the integrity of land if it's not valuable? And so to me, the direction that I would like to see some of this go is that we have specified regions of interest, which is this area, which is known for really fantastic cannabis. And there's many across California that do, and there's many across the United States that do. And each one of those groups, regions, would determine, do you have a similar characteristics so that you can work in clusters? And then the cluster would then use machine learning to really start to refine and develop the plants that would work optimally in that location and would only be optimal in that location. So that what you have now is a competitive edge to compete, and because your total market share is relatively small, you really can exist and function in the future. So right now, because all cannabis is cannabis, and it's a disaster the way distro and storefronts and movement are in most places. I mean, Oklahoma has twice the stores we do, which is mind-bending to me. But the point is that as the system's stable and they start to stratify and change in their normality to where it's a little bit less incredible idea that this cannabis is being sold at a store, then where do we go with this? And so I wanted to bring that topic up first, really, because it's something that I don't think most people are touching. And so I only saw maybe 10, 15 hands in the room touching Chat GPT. You're going to blink, and it is going to be in every aspect of your life. And it's scary because it allows people to be able to use these tools to become proficient and expert when really all they know how to do is ask a really good prompt. So what you have to be able to do is start to understand, how do you discern the difference between someone who actually knows what they're doing and someone who knows how to ask a good question on the keyboard. And then that discernment helps you start to understand and gets you thinking about, what questions do you want to ask about cannabis? What questions do you want to pose to a system to refine and create better products, directions that people haven't seen? And so that was the first of these disruptors. And a lot of this work was, my farm is, when I did the numbers on it, I said, hey, I made $2.75 running my farm last year. I said, I don't think I'm going to do that this year. I don't think I'm going to spend 700 hours to make $2 an hour. And someone says, I do it for the love. And I said, that's nice, then do it homeless, because you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage. So, and I've been growing for like 42 years, right? So like I'm pretty committed to my craft. But I'm also not someone who's frozen in my behavior. And what I know is my long goal is to always grow weed. And so the only way I can grow it for the rest of my life is if I maintain some forward vision of what's taking place. And so what I have been really fortunate with, for whatever reason, is that I constantly get thrust into these interesting positions globally. And what I try to do is I try to take the information that I get and share it to the degree I can without violating my non-disclosure agreements, and try to share it with my community, which is the craft community, because we all really share a really common desire of producing good cannabis. And what I'm trying to bring forth here is that if you're not playing with any of these AI devices, it's free. So you don't have to pay for it. Just go on and log on. And there's a $20 a month version. And I'm not even on that one. So what I do is I use this Chat GPT so that I can play the game of asking prompts. How do I steer a computer? How do I speak to it in a way? How do I tell it from the perspective of a biologist, from the perspective of a magazine writer, from the perspective of a consumer, what's important? And what it does, it mines all data on the internet. And so depending on what level, and if you pay for it, you can get different levels of dive where you can get the deepest dive or a more cursory dive, and the speed of the response is really the difference and the accuracy of the response. But the main point is you start to practice talking to these systems so that when this becomes an implementation and that we have access to it in our world of cannabis ag, it's not a foreign concept. It's just like with tissue culture, where everyone's like, for 20 grand, you can do your own meristem and scrub it. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because that's a $20 million facility and there's 27 PhDs in the field and they can't seem to do it. So I doubt you can take a weekend class and correctly outthink an entire building full of people who spent their entire lives doing micropropagation at PhD level for companies that are generating $400 million a year. But it's a good thought. And so what I know is that because I ask the questions, it lets me then have a critical view of new things that I see so that I don't mislead myself into making mistakes and go down wrong roads. And mistakes you get to make, but time you don't get to get back. That's really the issue, is that you're on a limited time frame. And when you're younger, you don't seem to really think about it. But once you get older, man, you start realizing I'm definitely halfway to dead, you know? And so I know that I'm basically skateboarding down a hill right now into death. And so what I know is that I don't have time to play. I have to make the most use of my time. And by being able to be aware of these disruptive technologies, what it does, it starts to allow you to become more comfortable with the theory and the idea so that you're not hiding in the sand hoping this doesn't happen. And I think that for most of us in cannabis, that's how we really got into the positions we're in, is that we just didn't want to believe the fact that larger, well-funded groups were going to be able to absolutely wage war against you because we said the customers care. Sure they do. Customers like Maseratis for Toyota prices too, but we're not giving them that. And so what you have is this reality that customers, I'll give you a good piece of information. You got the largest data set for prescriptions, or we call them recommendations for cannabis, comes from a company called Medican. So Medican was the single largest provider of cannabis recommendations in the state of California. So when you look at their data set, it's the largest data set of this topic. Of this massive data set, 95% of the people who came in to get a recommendation came in for 4 reasons. 4, appetite, sleep, mood, and pain. That's it. 5% are about the feeling other than those 4. And so when we talk about like what they're in there for, we really don't address the fact that they're there for these 4 reasons, and that they're not looking at cannabis in the way we do, where they want this huge education. And I always use the example of when you go buy milk, are you asking them exactly what cow it came from? Do you ask them, did you stroke the cow? Was the cow handily done? No. People just get the goddamn milk. And so, yeah, 1% of the population cares, and they're willing to pay an extra $2 or $3 for a sustainable milk. But the rest of the people don't. And so what we had this really disconnect from reality, because the only customer we had was, I always use this guy named Malibu Don, because Malibu Don was this buyer we used to use at Humboldt that was just a legend. And Malibu Don showed up with a truckload of money, and he looked at all your units, and he took 1,000 pounds at a time, and off he went. And so if you could satisfy Malibu Don, well, then you were a killer business person. Well, you were satisfying one person who knew exactly what they wanted to do. But when we went into the world of public cannabis and we started really trying to sell cannabis, we really didn't catch the fact that customers just want to buy weed that has potency so that it lasts longer. It's not about getting higher for them. It's about the fact that higher THC circulates in your system longer, and they've experienced it for 20 years that way. So to educate them that it's the terps that matter, they're like, that's nice. It doesn't seem to slow my pain down for an hour longer. So I'm glad you like terpy weed. I have $40 to spend, and I need it to last me a week, right? So we kind of forgot this part, right? And so that's why I bring these topics up. And when I bring them up in the past, people laughed and they were like, "You're insane." And I'm like, "Probably," but I'm usually pretty accurate too. And so what I wanted to bring up in this story was this first disruptive technology that is something that is incredibly powerful, and it's above our heads to touch on our own, but you have to start to play with the tools a little bit so that you can become comfortable with communicating to artificial intelligence so that when it's an available tool, you'll be able to use it in a way that's beneficial for you as farmers to create products and lines that are unique, that haven't been ever explored before, okay? So that's the first thing I wanted to cover. How are we doing on time? We got a minute. And the second topic was something called a DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And so when you're a small farmer, it's difficult to raise money because investors look at your overall canopy and say, there's really not enough there for me to risk, and I don't want to put that amount of money in. And what DAOs are a different form of business organization. And what they do is they allow you to create an organization where the people who buy into your DAO are actually part of the company. And with most of the DAOs, most of crypto, most NFTs, they were really like selling ideas. So if you look at a lot of the NFTs, these non-fungible tokens, and you know what NFT is, right? Non-replaceable. It has a unique identity. They were selling crypto kitties and shit. And to me, that's like a pet rock. So you got this incredible crypto kitty that has zero value downstream other than a novelty item. Nobody really created things that are real. But cannabis farms are real. They have a tangible product, and they have an actual tangible body. They exist. And when you take a look at cannabis and you realize that if you can get people to get excited about being involved in the business, and you can get people to be excited in being part of an operation, and you create management contracts within the DAO that clearly state who runs the operation, but the finances that are made, the profits that are made, how they're distributed, what gets done with it, and what happens in the future with our direction. If you allow the DAO, the participants in it, to be part of it, then what you have now is thousands or tens of thousands of people who might only have a 25-cent investment in your brand, but combined, the money that was invested is substantial. And what it does, it allows you to start to really work on a far higher level. So we're doing a DAO in Colombia on a project I'm involved in. And they wanted to do a raise, and I came up with the idea of doing it in this form. And what it does, it allows you to be able to create the farm as a driver, and for small farms, it would be, say, 2 or 3 farms, just like Appalachians. Appalachians shouldn't have to be 3 farms, but they are in California. You have to have 3 separate licenses combined. So say we combine 3 licenses for this argument. That gives you X amount of canopy. That group that gets involved in what you do, you now have an ability to take the group itself and start to create brain trusts, where all of a sudden the people that are now connected through common business can come up with ideas, and you can mint coin. So coin is what we're going to use as the token to say who controls and owns and receives. But you can mint new coin to go along with specific projects, and it allows there to be this incredible multiplication of progress in many forms. And so the cannabis farm becomes the driver, and then all the projects that come after that are a result of the profits being used in a form. And so if you treat the farm as a not-for-profit, anytime you're running a not-for-profit, you have to just basically zero out at the end of the fiscal year. But because it's impossible to zero a company out to zero and then have operating expenses for that first quarter, there's an allowable amount that all companies that are not allowed to make profit can hold, and they call it an operating expense, and it just allows you a type of stability. So you would have that in play, and then what occurs with the profits are ran through a DAO governance board that the people in the DAO vote for. And what this does is it starts to allow you to have people globally involved in your operation in a way that, like, most people, they don't like the idea of having anybody touching any of their stuff, but it's the opposite of how money's really made. And so when you're looking at an investment, groups come in, they invest money, they want to get returns. The problem with that is that it's at a much higher level of investment typically, but DAOs are in portions of coin. With DAOs, people can get involved in the company, and then they can actually earn more coin by being involved in the mechanism of the company. People can work on social media projects, and if they put in 40 hours on the project, they get X amount of coin. So what you're doing is you're creating a money-generating vehicle for people to participate, not just speculate. And then you can take specific batches of cannabis that you think are really high level. You can then call them an NFT. You can craft it as an NFT. You can mint a coin to go along with it. And now people can speculate and gamble on, does this have an ability to make X amount of money or does it not? And so if you see how money is made in the stock market and how it's made in investment, and you realize that these digital tools are really meant for the masses to be able to benefit from the same concepts, but at a much lower buy-in, and then the ability for you to function within that construct as a worker generating money, what you have now is this incredible involvement in your operation, and you start to have a globalization of your brand. And so for most people, they have a t-shirt and a hat. You know, I got a brand that I'm like, somebody know who you are outside of your kitchen? No. That means you don't have a brand, right? So you have an identity for yourself, but it's not catching traction. And what we have is this unbelievable weight for movement of product out of the United States. So the US, we're trapped in this hemp world where the largest hemp producers are really pharmaceutical companies. And so I couldn't understand why Delta 8 was so widely accepted when THC is not. And once I found out really who was producing hemp, it made crystal clear sense, where we're trapped in our world because we're just us. And we're going to war with these larger entities. And so we're waiting on this magic of when we're going to get to sell product outside the state. When are we going to get to sell product outside of the country? And I used to think it was going to be, a year or two ago, I said, probably 5-6 years I see federal. But when the Delta 8 miracle came out, I realized that that's something I don't see anymore. And so I work in other countries providing genetic information and consulting to then move the product to other countries where I help them understand how to sell the product. And then I do the education to the pharmacists and the doctors so they understand how do you begin a cannabis industry, right? And so all of you have the same skills because we're all doing the same stuff. It's just that I'm actively moving in that direction because I couldn't handle the fact that I was looking at a farm I had dumped all my money in and it's sitting fallow. But the point of this is that you have to pre-prime the pump. It's like trying to put a well together and not putting any water in the volute. You just don't get any suction. It just spins. But if we can get the volute filled and get the thing primed so we don't have an air gap, then water comes out of it quickly. And so to me, when you start to look at some of these modern worlds of technology, and you're able to, and I know it sounds crazy, I'm not a digital designer. What I do is I get brought in to attack the plan and then to decide, does it make any sense? As a rational, reasonable individual, would I invest in it? Could I convince someone to do this and then not have to hide from them the rest of my life because they want to shoot me? So it's things that you just need to look into because they're things that are powerful tools. The AI work is a disruptor, but you have to look into it so you can understand how to deal with it when it gets here. But with the world of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, NFTs, what it does, it allows people to speculate and be involved in small businesses and start to get traction on your identity in the world. Because really, just because herb can be moved to some other country, does that mean they're going to want yours? And does that mean that you just get white labeled and all you're doing is selling low quality product to somebody? Because by the time they get it there, who did what? Right? How do you know it's even going to be valuable for you? it's kind of like doing pre-rolls for a lot of small farms. I'm like, careful, because by the time the person consumes it, your brand looks like shit. And so it deteriorates your value more than it enhances it. And so those are the two of the things I really wanted to just bring up, because I think that both of them have this incredible potential to change the way we operate as cannabis operators. And if you work collaboratively, which I've been talking about for years, that no small individual can compete against a big individual. When I'm talking to groups that are raising 400 million, 500 million, well, the groups that raised that 6-7 years ago, they all failed. You don't think that they've got an education since then, right? So anytime someone says they all failed, I'm like, well, car industry failed. Well, the car there now. Planes were a failure. How about the internet? I'm old enough to remember when the internet was a failure. I remember the headlines that said, Jeff Bezos is a moron. And now he's the richest man in the world, right? And so does that mean that there wasn't other factors to play? No. It just means that whenever you get into a new industry, a new technology, what I learned really is that you fail until you figure it out. In my mind, it was really a radically different approach where they were far more thoughtful. And I didn't really understand how it went. Do you know how they build industries in politics? Because I had the governor in my office, and I asked him. I said, "How do you do this?" And he said, "Oh, we hear there's going to be a new industry, legal cannabis. We all sit down and figure out what would be a successful tax haul." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, $1 billion. He said, "We figured if we can make $1 billion in taxes in California, it's a success." And I said, "So what do you do next?" He goes, "We work backwards from the tax revenue and create the industry we think we'll need to make $1 billion." And that was an education that blew my mind, because it let me understand how undereducated I was in the process of creation of industries, because I've never been involved in the creation of an industry. But all of us here right now are all involved in the creation of the modern industry. And so you have to understand that the rules that apply are not ones that we're familiar with, and most of us probably aren't, and that we're really ill-equipped to work with because it's at a scale above our heads. And so these decentralized autonomous organizations, these DAOs, they allow you to be able to do some really interesting things, because it allows you to bring many people together at low investment rates and be part of a project. And then they don't run your farm. In your management contracts, you create, the farm is ran by us, but the profits are dispersed, and then the DAO members can determine what they want to do with those profits. They can also say, hey, we can take 10% of the profits and use it as seed money. We can then reinvest new money into a project using a coin as the indicator of the participation. And what you start to have now is this incredible fracturing of what you're doing, but exploding and exploring all these new avenues and ideas. And the problem that we have in cannabis is that we were alone for too long, and we wanted to be. I never wanted to be on a stage a day in my life. I didn't really have a choice. The people that were speaking for me at the time scared me, and I was afraid that if they spoke for me, I'd look like I was inept and that I would never be able to have a future. And so when I'm done with this, I'll never be back on the stage. I know exactly what I want, but I know I have to go through this process to get what I want. And that's the same with all of us, is that most of us did not want a conventional life. We wanted a life that was free of some of those constraints. But the problem was when cannabis went legal, it merged into that world. And it's a problem because for most of us, we got to really spend our time up the hill, spend my time on the job, didn't really have to worry about anything except growing pot. Well, you have to worry about a lot more than growing pot now. And I think that these are the things that have to be brought out. And so this lecture this weekend was fantastic because you had some of the most brilliant people covering some really interesting topics about cultivation. And so there's nothing that I'm going to talk about that I think that they haven't covered extremely well, better than I could cover it. But like what I do is global business development, and I work with some crazy groups around the planet doing this. And I see what I'm doing, and I understand how it's working because I get brought in to attack the idea. And that's what I thought of on the drive over here was Tyler said, hey, maybe you could cover what's strategies for small farms. And the strategy for the small farm is this. It's to work collaboratively so that you're not by yourself. It means that you're using your IP, your intellect. It's not just your intellectual property, but your intellect, your mind. and you're teaming up mentally to start to look at problems from a non-egotistical perspective so that you can take yourself out of the problem and look at it objectively, and then start to understand, are there other vehicles and methods that we can use to drive awareness to what we do? Because IG isn't doing it. Just know this, that people who buy, I own stores, people who buy weed are not on IG. They have jobs. They wake up, they take their kids to school, they're not on IG, they're driving a car, then they go to work, they're not on IG, then they go home and pick up the kid, they're not on IG, then they cook dinner, they're not on IG, then they have an hour or two at night to have a life, they're not on IG. So probably 90% of the people who buy at a dispensary, which is really our world now, legal sales, are not on Instagram. When we used to sell drugs to each other, it mattered because we were the ones who were buying it and growing it. Well, now we're too poor to be buyers, and so we have to rely on people who have jobs to buy our product. And what you find is this social media reality is one where you are allowing people who are angry and pissed off that they're no longer special to influence your decisions. Every single move I make, I have somebody talking shit. Every single time I put someone in a position to do well, I have to protect them from the public so that they don't stop doing what they're doing. And they would almost rather go bankrupt than have to deal with criticism because it's so aggressive. But the bottom line is strangers I don't know online don't raise my kids or pay for my wife's surgery or feed my dog. So I do. So what I know is that if you focus on your work and you team up with the people who are geographically close to you since you're in similar conditions, if you allow the team to take a look and figure out how do we work collaboratively to understand new technologies, new methodologies, and new perspectives, then we should do better. If you can understand that the customer is every bit as legacy as you are, they had to buy the drugs. They were doing an illegal deal too. I had to grow the weed. I had to risk the cops. They said the guy had to drive home in his car with a bag of weed in his pocket. What's the difference? So every customer that ever bought grass is legacy. And so we're crying to the customers continuously about our hardship and what an incredible hard life we have and how brutal it was. And you got guys working in rock pits, shoveling stone, and they don't care. And so what we're doing is we're ruining the very escape that they're using cannabis for, which is they want to be able to feel positive about the purchase. They want to feel positive about what took place, and to have to feel like you're paying to coddle people who are crying about how hard it was to, I can't even go on vacation. What I hear one of the guys in Humble say, I had to sell, this was at a public meeting, you know, I had to sell one of my properties. And I was laughing, and I'm like, you're not going to get any sympathy from a public on that one, right? That you had to sell one of them. That means you have more than one. And you had to sell it so that you could maintain your standard of living. So when you understand all that stuff, it just really helps you kind of clarify where we really are. And that means that we're no longer where we were. So since we're not where we were, we don't need to do any of the things we did, except the one key, which was to support the people you're involved with directly. And that's where, like, this type of meetings like this are crucial, because it allows people from dissimilar places to be able to meet and start to share ideas. And so what it does, it broadens your network, but in a really positive way, because you're not in each other's pockets. But what you can do is you can start to create think tanks where you're really able to start to refine and come up with better ideas and use those ideas to drive forward, so that what you're doing is you're creating the collision in the future for when you get there. So what I do is I look into the future and I realize I think that's where we're going to end up. And then I try to figure out how hard I'm going to have to throw myself to get to that intersection point. And so I'm looking downstream constantly. And I know that if I can catch that intersection point then I should be able to now be valid then. And then I do it again. So I keep doing this over and over again. Each time I get to a point, and it drives people I work with nuts, because as soon as we get to a point where everybody thinks we're safe, I've already left the room again. But what it's done, though, is it's allowed me to drive across the earth and be involved in projects globally at all these different levels. And what I know is I don't think I'm that special. I'm a person who wants to grow weed and have a good life. I think that's 99% of the people I meet in cannabis. So that's why I think these are applicable conversations, because it's not like, look what I'm doing. It's like, look what I'm doing, and if you know me, I'm pretty normal. So you should be able to do this too. You shouldn't have to be frozen in this ass whipping, believing that you're stuck. Because the truth of it is that you may be temporarily in a bad position, but there's incredible opportunities that are boiling around you, and by being able to kind of get out of the mindset of where you were and understand where we are and where we want to go and how we want to go together, it kind of gives you some opportunity. So AI, get on ChatGPT and just play with it so you can understand how to talk. And then go look up DAOs and understand how you can use these decentralized autonomous organizations to raise funds and develop multiple thought streams that you can't do alone. So that's the gist of that. And then we got a few minutes. Any questions? Anything? Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. I have 2 questions. First of all, about the chat GPT. In order to ask a good question, you do have to have some good information already to kind of guide the question. Won't that kind of given information out for free?
Yeah, but...
That's the first question.
Oh, yeah, I got you, okay.
The second question is about our market and the dispensaries. I'm in the feeling that we're selling product that's too strong for consumers. Where are the new consumers that were supposed to come in and be part of this market? Right now, we're growing cannabis to people that want 35%, 45%. Like you said, they want to last long. But what about a new consumer coming in? He buys a joint, he smokes it, he's stoned for 5 days, and he never comes back in. So I
All right,
just
let's answer
wanted to hear
second,
that.
let's answer the second question first, right? 33% of the California market is flower, 60% is derivative. So if we go derivative as an average of 60%, then we're already at 60%, right? You feel me? 33 out of 100 come into a dispensary in California and leave with weed. That's it. 33%. How many do beverage? 1.8% don't go beverages. So what you have is you have a world of people who are in the new customers are coming from vape technology. What they're used to is extremely high flavor levels and extremely high nicotine levels. For them, the idea of buying something and sipping on a pen is normal. And so it comes down again to titration. If I can buy more powerful for cheaper and I can control my dosage rate, I get an effective, better buy. Most people who buy pot have limited budgets. To me, there's only 2 customers that exist. And people lose their minds when I say this, but I'm like, look, there's 2 customers to me. Those that buy what they want, those that buy what they can afford, right? 95% of the people who come into a store buy what they can afford, not what they want. So what you're saying is we would create a division of lower potency cannabis for people who wanted more lightweight experiential varieties. And the problem with that in California is that distribution controls your life. And so if you don't meet metrics that distribution wants, which is a bottom line of like 25%, they won't touch it. It's too risky for them. So you're in this conundrum temporarily where distribution controls it, and because we only have 1,100 stores in the state, and we have almost the same amount of distribution licenses, it makes it almost impossible to get product into the store that reflects reality. It's just like with clonal sales. I have every clone company in California send me their list, and then I overlay them and I tell people, don't grow that. Because right now I'm telling you there's about 200,000 pounds of that being overproduced. And so what you have to be able to understand is that you're in a broken system, And because of it, it creates a reality that you really can't get out of. So you have to serve the needs of the customer, but what you do is you create 2 to 3% of your total product array as that low potency variety, and what you do is you allow your sales of your other products to bring traction and attention to your brand, and now you're able to talk to the customers that want these lower potency products, but you can't get around the distribution issue. And then the first question was, are they going to get your information? What information do you think you have that's that valuable? When you can't sell pot, what information are you holding that's that incredible that everybody wants? None. What you got to understand is that you are learning to use a tool. It's not that your question is going to be the incredible question, like only know. What you're learning to do is you're learning to teach the computer how to approach the question. It's not even so much the question, it's the perspective of the computer. So I talk to the computer and I say, from the perspective of a magazine writer with this audience, what would be this topic? From the perspective of someone in this direction. I mean, you have to really take it through the piece. So there's nothing you're going to release personally that's going to suddenly screw you. It's that you have to learn how to play the game. And I'm not trying to be a ball buster saying you don't have value, because you definitely have value. You're a human being. But when we're talking about global work, like this industry is going to blow up to a degree that's going to be frightening. And so what you have to do is you've got to get into the tool and play with it, so that you can start to understand how do you ask questions, how do you steer the prompts, so that when we have it on our phone and you're able to start working with groups that allow you to do genetic development using this tool, that's when you're going to be able to have a background in it. It's like the number of people in Humboldt County that don't even know how to function at a modern level is frightening, because they never had to. So now they're trying to get jobs, and I mean, they can't do a lot. And I'm trying to put them into educational programs. We're trying to tie them into the university for grant work for educational programs. But they're terrified to even go through school because they feel so undereducated, because they've hid from that part of society for so long. But the problem is, where do they go? So my thing is that you have to be able to look at these tools and be bold. If you were bold enough to grow dope, you're bold enough to play on the computer. And that's something that you just have to play with. And if you don't want to ask the questions and reveal your information, then have your friends sit down and start to spit questions out, so that you can just learn how to really make the communication, because it's not so simple. Tell me what I need to know. Computer doesn't know what to even answer. And it could be a wrong answer because you're not steering it correctly. And so what I've learned from playing with these prompts is that that's the art. And that'll actually become an incredibly lucrative business field, the masters of talking to the computer. So don't be afraid to play with it. You got to get the skills. And if in your case, 2 to 3% of your total product array. Someone said, like, how do you bring haze into the world? And I'm like, it's almost impossible to really cultivate it and make money, because the customer doesn't want to spend $120 for an eighth, because it took you 140 days to finish it. So what you do is you create the product as a small scale, and you only unleash it at events. You unleash it at public meetings. You unleash it in special circumstances so people can be exposed to it. And what it does, it starts to allow you to gauge the interest. The interest lets you understand how much canopy you're going to invest in that product. And that's how you answer the question. You go back from demand, just like the government goes back from tax. What we do is we go, they're going to want to buy a lot of it. And they don't. And so, well, I can't give it to you for $40 an eighth. There's no way. It's going to cost me double to grow it, because it took twice as long. So it's the same situation where whenever you're doing experimentation, 1 to 2% of your total crop is where you play games. And everything else is sure bet and then burgeoning trends. So things that you know are stable, things that you think are going to lift up, and then things that you think are risky. And that way what it does is it mitigates your risk. I had a lawyer on retainer for like 25 years. I learned all about risk mitigation, because every time I had an idea, he'd be like, ooh, let's mitigate the risk. But it helped me understand, don't be so ballsy and make calculated risks. So did that get you kind of close? Okay. Anybody got any questions?
5-minute warning.
Yeah.
I can make this quick. I keep hearing rumors THCA is the next Delta 8. Okay, somebody knows something else. I don't know. Had a comment?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know the big picture of the DEA and the FDA. So what I know is that I'm not even concerned with it anymore. I'm not worrying about anything other than, for me, every country I work in, I assess the issues. So like, what's the issues with moving herb globally? CFUs, colony forming units. So it changes how you can produce product, and it changes what can go from country to country because you have to irradiate. Because if the product makes it to the country and gets scanned and doesn't pass, that shit's going back. Right? So someone's paying for it to cross the borders, and someone's paying for it to return with no sales. So those regulations I can clearly work with because they're written. But stuff to do with the FDA and the DEA in the United States, what I know is that there's no rhyme or reason to what they do, in my opinion. It's that they have an agenda above us, and that what we have to do is not really look at it and just say, look, this is what we're allowed to do. We have a lane. And then the only way that we have any ability to be able to make change in it is to get public adoption of what we do. And the only way that you can do that is to get people to be interested in what you do. And once you get enough people interested, then they care. But until they're not interested, they don't care. And that's the problem. So I don't know what new cannabinoid is going to be pulled off and said, hey, we can do this too. And I quit caring because I just realized that I'm stuck in a system that's above me and that I can only do what I can do, you know?
You get that one? No.
It's frightening. It really is. It's frightening. You're in a country that's tyrannical.
Hey there, Kevin. My question is, we've mentioned the word craft here a couple times, so I'm going to ask the question that I know has been asked many, many times in various forms, but curious your answer to the definition of craft.
Totally. Craft cannabis, it's easy for me to define it, that craft cannabis is the intent of the product is for the experience of the user. The financial value is secondary. When you talk commercial, which is the opposite, financial considerations are the primary consideration. So if I'm willing to take a little less money but to produce a better product, then and better in what way? It would require more effort. It would require more diligence. It would require bending to the will of this variety. That's craft. Craft is something that your constraints are not financial as much as qualitative. And I think that that's the only way to say it, because what we do is we talk about canopy size, but when you got 300 million square feet, it's kind of hard to say that, I'm quality minded. No, you're commoditized. You're a commoditized crop. You're financially minded. And so can there be craft indoor? Yeah. And I'm not an indoor guy, but yes, there can be craft indoor. And can there be craft light depth? Yes. And can there be craft greenhouse? Yes. And can there be craft salt grown? Sure. Because the customers who like that profile do. So to them, that's a craft product. But if you're growing something and you're saying, it gives me 93 grams per square foot, that's the first words out of your mouth, that's not a craft operator. It can't be. The first words out of your mouth are, the qualities of the product are such, the people who buy it do this, and this is what I make. And yes, I could derive more potential income from commercial, but you don't really know because the sales velocity might be slow. And so we argued this out. We had this discussion the other day. We all argued it out. But my view on it is it's really financial constraints or financial desires secondary to quality of product desires. And to me, it's that simple.
Thank you, Kevin.
Great. Thank you very much. Woo.